the fire lance. The year is 950 CE. The soldier in front of you straps a tube of green bamboo to the end of his spear. He lights the fuse. For 3 seconds, nothing happens. Then the world erupts. A jet of fire, sparks, and screaming hot gas tears out of the tube directly into the face of the man standing beside him. The enemy is 30 meters away. Your own man is already on fire. This is the fire lance, the direct ancestor of every firearm on Earth. Historians trace the entire lineage of gunpowder weaponry, muskets, cannons, rifles, artillery, back to this single bamboo tube. The propellant formulas preserved in the Wujing Zongyao, a state military manual compiled in 1044 CE, specified approximately 60% saltpeter, with charcoal and sulfur making up the remainder in varying proportions across different recipes in the text. That mixture generated internal tube pressure that bamboo walls could not always contain. Combustion temperatures exceeded 400 degrees Celsius. Bamboo tensile strength near zero past 300. The math was not reassuring to the man holding it. The Wujing Zongyao itself contains one of the earliest recorded safety advisories in weapons history, warning that propellant must not exceed 2/3 capacity, lest the tube burst and the soldier be consumed. They documented the failure mode in the official state military handbook, then kept issuing the weapon for over a century. Why? Some researchers ask whether the psychological terror it produced in anyone who witnessed it, friend or enemy alike, was the actual point, and casualties on both sides were simply the price of that terror. The fire lance didn't just change warfare. It may have been the first weapon designed to frighten its own army into fighting harder. Thunder Crash Bomb. Imagine defending a city wall by throwing burning iron spheres at an enemy massing below. Now imagine that no one, not the engineers who built them, not the commanders who ordered them, not the soldiers who lit the fuses, actually understood how far the blast would travel. The Mongols were 50 meters out. The kill radius was 60. The Thunder Crash Bomb was the world's first iron-cased explosive grenade deployed by Jin Dynasty defenders during the Mongol siege of Kaifeng, which began in 1232 CE. The official history of the Jin Dynasty records that its detonation shook heaven and earth, and that those who stood near the point of impact, whether Jurchen or Mongol, were destroyed alike. That is not a historian's embellishment. That is a contemporary military record documenting bilateral casualties from a single weapon. Archaeological excavations at Kaifeng between 1985 and 1990 recovered intact iron-cased shells. Metallurgical analysis by the Chinese Academy of Sciences confirmed wall thickness of 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters, sufficient for genuine fragmentation, the defining characteristic of a modern grenade. The fuse technology was slow match cord with a burn rate that varied so dramatically between batches that 2 identical bombs with 2 identical fuses could detonate at entirely different intervals. There was no standardized fuse length. There was no minimum safe distance protocol recorded in any surviving document. The Jin Shi and related dynastic records document the Thunder Crash Bomb as among the first explosive weapons whose casualties explicitly include friendly deaths from its own blast radius, a detail that historian Joseph Needham, in Science and Civilization in China, treated as historically significant in tracing the development of explosive weaponry. The Jin defenders lost Kaifeng anyway. And the record suggests the weapon's psychological effect on their own soldiers, men who had never heard an iron bomb detonate, was nearly as devastating as its effect on the Mongols pressing at the walls. Poison smoke bomb. The recipe calls for 15 ingredients: arsenic oxide, wolfsbane extract, burning pitch, dried organic matter for biological contamination, croton oil. You pack it into a sphere, light it, and hurl it into the enemy formation. Then the wind shifts. The cloud rolls back over you like a slow decision you cannot take back. The poison smoke bomb's complete formula is preserved verbatim in the Wujing Zongyao, compiled in 1044 CE, making it one of the oldest surviving chemical weapons recipes in human history. The compilers did not include it as a cautionary tale. They included it as a standard-issue battlefield tool with recommended sphere diameter and ignition method. The active compounds, arsenic trioxide, aconite alkaloids from wolfsbane, and croton oil, produce rapid incapacitation within 60 to 90 seconds of inhalation. Modern pharmacological analysis confirms this is a toxicological combination of startling efficiency. The sphere burned above 200 degrees Celsius to aerosolize the arsenic effectively, creating both toxic smoke and incendiary flame simultaneously. Sphere diameter was approximately 12 centimeters. Coverage in still air, an estimated 15 to 25 square meters. Scholars of Chinese military history have identified this as among the earliest documented cases of a state military deploying a combined chemical incendiary agent predating comparable European concepts by several centuries. The Wujing Zongyao contains no wind assessment instructions, no retreat protocols, no minimum safe distance for the operator's own unit. For a manual that specifies exact propellant ratios to fractions of a grain in other weapons, the silence around deploying an arsenic and wolfsbane sphere without any wind guidance is either a catastrophic oversight or a confession that no safe deployment distance actually existed. Exploding clay grenade. Hold the sphere in your right hand. It weighs about the same as a large orange. The clay is cool, slightly rough. The fuse protrudes from one end, a slow match cord that should give you 4 seconds before detonation. Should. That word carrying enormous weight in this particular moment. Your left hand reaches for the torch. You make a choice. The exploding clay grenade was the Song Dynasty's standard close-quarters incendiary weapon, deployed from approximately 1000 CE onward. Archaeological recovery at Hebei battlefield sites between 2003 and 2007 produced over 40 specimens in varying preservation states. The wall thickness variation across those specimens tells the real story: 0.4 centimeters to 1.8 centimeters in grenades of nominally identical design. That variance produced dramatically different fragmentation patterns and detonation pressures. Institute of Archaeology analysis in Beijing confirmed these findings in 2007. Internal powder fill weight varied by an estimated 20 to 35% across a single production batch. Every grenade was handmade by individual artisans working to approximate specifications. 2 grenades from the same batch could behave as entirely different weapons, and the soldier in the field had no way of knowing which he was holding until the fuse was lit. Historian Kenneth Chase, in Firearms, A Global History to 1700, noted that the single most consistent complaint in Song military logistics records regarding incendiary projectiles was premature detonation, a complaint that appeared with higher frequency for ceramic case devices than for any other weapon class. Those complaints began in the 11th century. The ceramic grenade remained standard issue for over 100 years after they started arriving. Some historians now ask whether this represents one of history's earliest documented cases of a military knowingly accepting preventable friendly casualties as a budget decision. Rocket arrow cart. Picture a wooden cart with 160 launch tubes on each side. 320 bamboo rockets all fused together, all pointing at the enemy cavalry bearing down on you. Someone gives the order. Every fuse ignites at once. The cart doesn't fire. The cart flies. The rocket arrow cart is documented in full technical detail in the Huolongjing, the Fire Dragon Manual compiled around 1412 CE, the most comprehensive gunpowder weapons manual in pre-modern history. The manual presents 320 simultaneous rocket ignitions from a wheeled platform not as a known hazard, but as the weapon's primary tactical advantage. Every basic principle of force and motion predicts the outcome. Each rocket generated an estimated 0.5 to 1.5 kilograms of thrust at ignition. 320 rockets igniting simultaneously on a cart estimated to weigh approximately 200 kilograms produced a combined thrust the platform was never designed to survive. The Huolongjing specifies the tubes arranged in two angled banks to create a divergent spread pattern, aerodynamically sensible for coverage, but concentrating maximum recoil stress directly on the cart's central axle at the moment of ignition. Modern reconstruction experiments at the Chinese Military Museum demonstrated that simultaneous ignition of even 40 rockets in a fixed array produced sufficient recoil vibration to fracture period-accurate wooden mounting structures. The operational instructions specify the cart should be aimed directly at the enemy, with no mention of anchoring, bracing, or how far crew should stand back before ignition. Historian Tonio Andrade noted in The Gunpowder Age that the rocket arrow cart appears in Ming military inventories but is conspicuously absent from specific battle accounts. A striking silence for a weapon of such extraordinary documented specification. Perhaps the men who operated it were simply too busy holding on. Fire oil thrower. The pump operator cranks the handle. Petroleum, imported overland from Central Asia at considerable expense, pressurizes inside a bronze cylinder. A lit torch is held at the nozzle. Burning oil arcs across the water toward the enemy fleet. Then the bronze cylinder develops a crack. The crack takes approximately 1 second to become a catastrophic rupture. The operator takes approximately 0 seconds to understand what that means. The fire oil thrower first appears in the Wudai Huiyao, compiled in 961 CE. Its peak deployment came during the Song naval campaigns on the Yangtze River in 975 CE, during the assault on the southern Tang Kingdom. One of the largest naval engagements in Chinese history to that point. The fuel was naphtha, imported via the Silk Road from petroleum seeps near the Caspian region, a trade route documented in Tang and Five Dynasties commercial records covering Central Asian commodities reaching China. The weapon required the operator to stand directly behind a pressurized bronze vessel containing ignited petroleum while manually pumping. The pressure required to project flame an operationally useful distance exceeded what cast bronze of period metallurgical quality could reliably sustain under repeated operation. Thermal cycling from the burning fuel compounded the metal stress with every firing sequence. Recovered bronze pump components at Hangzhou confirmed wall thickness of approximately 4 millimeters, insufficient for sustained pressurized operation at temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Celsius, according to modern metallurgical stress analysis. The Song Huiyao records that several Song fire weapon ships were destroyed during the 975 CE engagement, notable because the southern Tang fleet was significantly outgunned. The court's response was an order for improved devices, not a tactical reassessment of deploying unstable pressurized fire weapons on wooden ships surrounded by water. The improved devices were developed. The original operators were not replaced. They had already handled that themselves. Fire arrow rockets. 300 archers knock fire arrows simultaneously. Each arrow carries a bamboo tube of gunpowder lashed behind the head. Each tube has a fuse. On command, 300 fuses are lit. On command, 300 bows are drawn. On command, 300 arrows are released into the sky. 50 meters out, the wind picks up. The formation watches its own volley describe a slow, graceful arc and return. The fire arrow rocket is documented as a distinct propellant-assisted weapons category in the Wujing Zongyao of 1044 CE, with Chinese military records placing the development of compound propellant fire arrows within the early Northern Song period, around the latter half of the 10th century. The physics of the problem were straightforward, and for the soldiers on the receiving end, devastating. A standard arrow achieves ballistic stability through the aerodynamic interaction between fletching and air. Attach a burning, gas-producing propellant tube behind the arrowhead, and every aerodynamic assumption changes mid-flight. Thrust vector shifts as the propellant burns unevenly. Fletching, operating in the turbulent exhaust wash of its own rocket, loses corrective authority. The arrow follows the exhaust. The exhaust has no preference for direction. Modern aerodynamic testing of period-accurate replicas conducted by the Chinese Institute of Military History found lateral deviation ranges of 15 to 40 degrees from aim point at 50 meters, sufficient to return a volley of 300 arrows into a formation with statistical regularity. Wind speeds of 20 kilometers per hour, a moderate and common condition on the North China Plain, could deflect a propellant-assisted arrow laterally by an estimated 8 to 12 meters at 60-meter range. The Wujing Zongyao itself recommends launching fire arrows only in calm conditions. That operational caveat is an admission that the weapon was most unreliable in exactly the terrain where it was most needed: the open, wind-exposed plains of northern China where Liao and Jurchen cavalry operated. Historian Needham documented that Song Field commanders' complaints about fire arrow accuracy used language suggesting the deviation problem was well known and considered, at the time, insoluble. Nest of Bees launcher, 32 rockets, 1 hexagonal box, 1 fuse connecting all 32 ignition points at once. The design is almost beautiful, a honeycomb of engineered destruction. The hexagonal cells direct each rocket at a slightly divergent angle, spreading the payload across a wide target area. The geometry is clever. The problem is that the same geometry channeling exhaust gases outward also channels them inward from any rocket that fails to exit cleanly, and the box is in your hands. The Nest of Bees launcher is documented in full blueprint detail in the Huolongjing of 1412 CE, including hexagonal cell configuration, fuse routing, and recommended operational posture, held at shoulder height, aimed toward the enemy. Cell diameter was approximately 3.5 centimeters, barely sufficient for the bamboo rocket bodies specified in the same manual. In humid field conditions, that friction fit could prevent smooth rocket exit and cause any individual tube to act as a closed breech combustion chamber, connected by a single fuse network to 31 other loaded rockets. A modern reconstruction for the National Palace Museum in Taipei demonstrated that a single-cell misfire in a period-accurate device produced an internal pressure event sufficient to fracture the wooden housing structure, with the fragmentation pattern directed toward the operator. The simultaneous ignition fuse network meant there was no abort sequence. Once the primary fuse was lit, all 32 rockets would either exit their cells or combust inside them. There was no intermediate option. Historian Tonio Andrade observed that the Nest of Bees appears in multiple Ming weapons inventories, but specific battle accounts describing its use are remarkably sparse. The Ming Weapons Bureau knew an improved cell-fusing design was necessary. The gap between that knowledge and the implementation of that design was filled with operators who were issued the original version, told to hold it at shoulder height, and point it at the enemy. How many of them fired it successfully, and how many simply became part of the trajectory problem is a question the records do not answer. Thunderclap mine. You bury the ceramic vessel 2 hand spans below the surface. Inside, gunpowder, iron fragments, a pressure plate connected to the firing mechanism by a bamboo lever. You memorize the path back. Then it rains for 3 days, and every landmark you used looks identical to the one beside it. The Mongols advance. So do you, across the same ground, in the dark. The Thunderclap Mine is documented in Song military memorials from 1277 CE, attributed to the engineer Lu Qiangxia, making it one of the earliest recorded landmine designs in human history, predating European buried explosive devices by at least 2 centuries. The design was a ceramic vessel sealed with lacquer, containing a gunpowder charge sufficient to kill or maim any who tread upon it, activated by a bent bamboo spring pressure trigger. Historian Peter Lorge, in the Asian Military Revolution, identified this as the origin point of a persistent tactical problem in Chinese military history, deploying area denial weapons in terrain that subsequent friendly forces would need to traverse without any institutional mapping procedures to manage the hazard. Bamboo spring constant varies by approximately 40% based on moisture content. A device calibrated in dry conditions would trigger at significantly lower pressure in wet conditions, potentially activating under the weight of a single soldier rather than the armored mass it was designed for. No mapping protocol appears in any surviving Song document from this period. No marking system, no deactivation procedure. The Huolongjing, compiled 135 years after Lu Qiangxia's design, explicitly recommends marking buried devices with stakes placed at measured intervals. That recommendation exists because the unmarked mine problem had been generating casualties for over a century before anyone wrote down a solution. The engineers who built the Thunderclap Mine may never have expected their army to need to cross that ground again. It was designed for a last stand, not a retreat. The soldiers who came after inherited both the weapon and its indifference. Flame Dragon Cannon. The weapon looks like a dragon. A hollow bamboo body painted in lacquered scales, mouth open at the front. 4 rockets strapped to its belly. Ignite them, and the dragon skims across the water at high speed toward the enemy fleet. When the first stage rockets burn out, they trigger a second set of fire arrows packed inside the body, which burst out of the dragon's mouth and scatter across the target. It is the most sophisticated 2-stage rocket weapon designed anywhere in the ancient world. It also had a humidity problem, and it operated on rivers. The Flame Dragon Cannon is documented in complete technical diagram in the Huolongjing of 1412 CE, including specific dimensions, a 2-stage ignition sequence, and a note designating it for naval use against enemy ships at distance. The concept of staged rocketry, burning one propellant stage to ignite a second, was not mathematically formalized in Western science until Konstantin Tsiolkovsky's work on rocket propulsion in the early 20th century, and practical multi-stage Western rocket development did not occur until the 20th century. The Huolongjing documents the same engineering principle nearly 500 years earlier. The engineering concept was genuinely extraordinary. The execution rested entirely on a single internal slow match fuse running through the dragon body's wall, bridging first stage burnout to second stage ignition. Slow match cord burn rate varies by up to 100% in humid naval conditions, a problem the Huolongjing itself implicitly acknowledges by recommending lacquered fuse storage when at sea, in the same section where the flame dragon appears. If the internal fuse ran even 20% faster than nominal, the second stage would initiate before the first stage rockets had fully burned, creating simultaneous combustion of all propellant mass at the launch point. Historian Tonio Andrade noted that no surviving battle record describes a successful combat deployment of the Flame Dragon cannon. A weapon of this detail Sophistication and explicit operational classification simply disappears from the historical record after the blueprint. Was it never successfully deployed? Were the failures classified? Or did the Ming military discover very quickly that the gap between brilliant concept and functional weapon was a gap measured in operator casualties, and chose to preserve the blueprint while quietly retiring the device, recording neither the successes nor the failures in any archive that survived? 10 weapons, 1 signature. Every single one of them was built by the most sophisticated gunpowder civilization in human history. Everyone was documented in state-commissioned military manuals with extraordinary technical precision. And everyone, in some manner and on some battlefield, turned on the people who deployed them. Historians will tell you that is the cost of innovation, that new technology always carries early adoption casualties and progress demands sacrifice. That explanation is fair. It is also incomplete, because what the Wujing Zongyao and the Huolangjing together reveal is that these failures were not surprises. They were written down. The bamboo burst rates, the bilateral blast radii, the wind-dependent poison clouds, the fuse variants, all of it documented, acknowledged, filed, and then the weapons were issued anyway. Most people read that and see the inevitable friction of a civilization pushing against the edge of what it knew. You watch this far. You're asking the harder question. If they knew, why didn't they stop? The most dangerous weapon ever built was not the one that killed the most enemies. It was the one that every engineer understood, every commander documented, every soldier feared, and every dynasty kept issuing anyway. Subscribe and come find out what else history wrote down and hoped we wouldn't notice.